The studio lights were bright, but the tension was brighter. Cameras rolled as the International Leadership Forum kicked off in Washington, D.C. Powerful leaders filled the long table: Trump, Macron, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and quietly seated near the end, the young African revolutionary, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. As he adjusted his mic, ready to speak on African independence and resource sovereignty, Trump suddenly leaned forward, his voice loud and sharp. "Security. Remove him, now." The room froze. Gasps, confused whispers. Ibrahim sat still, stunned, but calm. He didn't move. "He doesn't belong here. This isn't some village rally," Trump shouted, pointing directly at him. Cameras flashed. Security moved. But Ibrahim didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned his head and looked straight at the security officer approaching. That look, strong, proud, unafraid, spoke louder than words. The room cracked under the weight of the moment. Some applauded. Others shouted, "Let him speak." And then, from the far end of the table, a chair scraped back. Slowly, firmly, Ketanji Brown Jackson stood up. Every head turned. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to ever serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, stood with a look that could cut stone. "I will not sit here and let this happen," she said, voice calm, but carrying like thunder across the studio. Trump scoffed. "This isn't your courtroom, Justice. This is politics." Ketanji didn't blink. "Then let me be clear. For the cameras, for history, and for every child watching this across the world, you don't throw out voices you don't like. That's not democracy. That's fear." A hush fell. The cameras zoomed in. Traoré didn't move. Still seated, still silent, but his eyes locked with hers. For a moment, two continents stood together, Africa and America, truth and justice. The security officer stopped midway. Trump, red-faced, turned to producers. "Cut the cameras!" But it was too late. The video was already being streamed across the world. Phones buzzed, hashtags exploded. Back in Burkina Faso, people watched from tea shops and dusty classrooms. Tears welled up in eyes. Someone in the studio began clapping. Then another, and another. Something bigger had started. The clapping didn't stop. Even some American officials began to rise. A senator nodded slowly. A CNN reporter whispered, "Did that just happen?" Trump slammed the table. "You're all being played. He's a radical." "No, sir. He's a leader," Ketanji replied. At last, Ibrahim stood up. The studio went completely quiet again. He adjusted his simple uniform and finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I came here to speak peace, but I see now. It was never peace you feared. It was the truth." You could hear people breathing. "I represent millions of young Africans who are tired of being told we are less than. We are not here to beg. We are here to build, together or without you." Then he looked directly at Trump. "You can silence me here, but can you silence the millions watching? The youth in Chicago, Lagos, Ouagadougou, Detroit?" The silence that followed was heavy with truth. Ketanji placed her hand on the table. "Let him speak." And this time, nobody moved to stop him. What Traoré would say next would not only shake the room, but tear open decades of hidden power games between the West and Africa. And viewers? They couldn't stop watching. Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the podium, the same one Trump had tried to push him away from just minutes ago. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mention the insult. Instead, he looked into the camera, straight into the eyes of the world, and began to tell a story. "When I was 12, he said quietly, I saw my uncle beg for medicine. He was a teacher who built his village's first school. He died because someone decided his life wasn't worth the cost of a few pills." A few people in the room looked down. He didn't die from a disease, Traoré continued. He died from injustice, from a system where power decides who gets to live and who doesn't. The studio was silent. You could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Then he added, "You may call me unqualified, but I carry the weight of a people who have been ignored for far too long." Even those who had doubted him started to shift in their chairs, because suddenly it wasn't just about politics. It was about something deeper, human dignity. In the far back corner of the studio, a woman clutched her chest. She had come to watch the event as part of the press. An African-American journalist, mid-50s, sharp, seasoned, but tired. As Traoré spoke, she suddenly felt tears on her cheeks. She wiped them, confused. She had covered war zones. She had been in the White House briefing room. But something about this young African man's quiet pain cracked something deep in her. Because she remembered her own brother, shot in 1996. Wrong place, wrong time. His name barely made the paper. They didn't even spell his name right, she once told a friend. And now, as Traoré spoke of injustice, of who was allowed to matter, it felt like her brother was being spoken for too. Behind her, a camera crew member sniffled. Another wiped his eyes. Without yelling, without blaming, Ibrahim Traoré had done something no politician in that room had. He reminded them they were human. Trump sat stiffly, red-faced, unable to interrupt without looking even worse. And Ketanji? She was watching closely, quietly, almost like she knew something bigger was coming. In the control room, panic. One of the producers whispered, "Trump said to cut the feed. Should we?" But the lead director shook his head. "Keep it rolling. This is history." Back in the studio, Ibrahim spoke just 3 more sentences. "I don't hate America. I respect it, but I will never kneel before it." And that's when something unexpected happened. The studio audience stood, not all at once, but row by row. First the journalists, then the economists. Then a U.S. senator from Georgia clapped once, then again. Traoré didn't smile. He simply stepped back from the podium, looked at Ketanji, and nodded once. Trump slammed his folder shut, muttering, "This is a setup." But in living rooms across Africa, young people watching on tiny smartphones started recording their own videos of support, of tears, of hope. Hashtags trended across Twitter. "Let him speak." "Ibrahim speaks for us." "Africa stands tall." The forum that was meant to shut Traoré down had done something else. It had given him a stage, and what would happen next? No one could have predicted. Inside a modest radio station in Ouagadougou, a young girl named Fatimata, barely 11, clutched an old phone to her ear. The broadcast from Washington was playing over a small speaker. Her eyes were wide. "Is that really him?" she asked softly. "Is that Ibrahim Traoré?" Her mother nodded. "Yes, that's our president." Fatimata stared at the phone, trembling. 2 months ago, her father had been arrested during a protest over foreign mining rights. No charges, no trial. And now, on international television, Traoré was speaking truth to power. At that moment, Fatimata whispered something into the phone. "Tell him not to stop. Tell him we are watching." It was a call into a local station's WhatsApp line. They played it live without thinking. And within minutes, millions had heard her voice. "Tell him not to stop." In Washington, someone handed Ibrahim a phone. He listened silently, hand over his mouth. He nodded once, then slowly looked up, eyes glassy, and returned to the mic. That child's voice. It reached through satellites, headlines, and hatred, and reminded him he was not alone, and neither was she. Behind the stage, phones buzzed like hornets. A dozen aides scrambled. "Shut down the live feed now." "Who cleared Traoré to speak?" "Do you know what he's doing to our reputation?" Inside a locked room nearby, a high-level U.S. strategist leaned into Trump and whispered, "We underestimated him. He's not here to take space. He's here to shift the world." Trump didn't reply. His jaw clenched. Outside, Ketanji stood still. She wasn't a politician. She had nothing to gain. But watching Ibrahim stand alone on that stage reminded her of something painful from her past. Her father's trial. He had been wrongly accused decades ago. A judge silenced him, wouldn't even let him finish a sentence. She had sworn that day to never let another black voice be shut down unjustly. And now, the moment had come. She stepped forward again. "Mr. President," she said firmly, "you've had your time. You've had your mic. It's his turn now." The crowd roared. Even the cameras turned back. For the first time in the entire event, Trump sat down and stayed silent. Ibrahim gripped the edge of the podium. He took a breath, not to speak from the head, but from the soul. "You speak of order and control," he said, looking around the room, "but I was once the kind of child your systems were built to forget." He glanced into the crowd. "When I was 7, I carried buckets of water for my neighbors before school. I walked past broken clinics. I saw soldiers throw food into the dirt just to watch children cry." He paused. You could hear someone sobbing softly in the back row. "I was one of them," he continued. "One of the voiceless, but no more." Then he said something that no one expected. "I don't need your pity. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to build something better, with or without your help." A slow wave of applause began, and in that instant, somewhere across the world, in Kenya, in Detroit, in a refugee camp in Chad, people felt seen. He wasn't just representing Burkina Faso anymore. He was standing for everyone who had ever been told to sit down. And for the first time in a long time, the world listened. An aide rushed onto the stage with a sealed envelope. The forum moderator hesitated, then handed it to Ibrahim Traoré. He opened it slowly, carefully, under 1,000 flashing lights. Inside was a single page, handwritten, with no signature. Traoré read it quietly, then looked up and spoke to the room. It says, "You speak like my grandfather. He died with chains on his ankles and his heart still full of love for Africa. He would have been proud of you. Don't stop talking. Don't stop dreaming." No one knew who wrote it, but it didn't matter. Because in that moment, the air in the studio changed. What started as political theater had become something deeper, sacred. A black woman in the third row began weeping. The director didn't cut the cameras. He zoomed in. And on screens across the world, people weren't just watching a speech anymore. They were witnessing a spiritual moment. A moment that reminded everyone watching what it means to be dignified in the face of humiliation. And Ibrahim again said nothing more. He let the silence say everything. The panel moderator, visibly shaken, turned to Trump. "Would you like to respond, sir?" Trump leaned forward, adjusted his mic, then said nothing. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in years, the former president seemed unsure, not afraid of the man across from him, but afraid of what the world had just seen. A man with no armor, only truth. And that kind of truth is harder to fight. Ibrahim leaned slightly forward. "I came here expecting rejection, but what I did not expect was to find people who still listen." He turned his eyes toward Ketanji Brown Jackson. "Justice isn't a courtroom," he said gently. "It's a choice. A daily one." She nodded, silently moved. Then, for the first time in the forum's history, a standing ovation came not from politics, but from pain. A quiet, collective release. In that studio, people weren't clapping for power. They were clapping for truth. And in places like Dakar, Kinshasa, New Orleans, and Baltimore, People cried watching. Some said it felt like church. Backstage, one of the organizers quietly removed a chair from the panel. The chair Trump had ordered for Ibrahim to be taken away from. It sat near the curtain. Ibrahim saw it and walked over. He picked it up himself and carried it back to the stage. Everyone watched in silence as he placed the chair next to his podium and sat down slowly. Then he said, "They removed my seat, but they could never remove my voice." A teenage girl watching from Lagos whispered to her mother, "He's like a mountain." The image of Traoré calmly placing the chair down went viral in seconds. It became a symbol, a meme, a painting, a flag. Justice Jackson later told the press, "I've never seen anyone do something so simple and say so much." And then she walked over, on live television, and sat next to him. 2 seats, 2 people, and the world watching. Because sometimes the revolution isn't loud. Sometimes it's just 2 chairs, side by side. Somewhere in Atlanta, Georgia, an old man sat in silence. His name was David Rucker, 74, a retired civil rights activist who had marched with John Lewis and once shaken hands with Dr. King himself. He hadn't cried in years, until today. On his TV screen, Ibrahim Traoré sat beside Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, saying nothing, just being present, unshaken, whole, and human. David wiped his eyes with a trembling hand and whispered to no one, "He reminds me of my father, a man they called Boy until the day he died." His granddaughter walked in. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He looked at her, then back at the screen. "This is what we fought for," he said. "Not just speeches, but dignity." At the same moment across the Atlantic, a group of students in Senegal began a protest, not of rage, but of unity. They stood silently outside the French embassy, holding signs that read, "Let us speak. Africa is not a guest, we are the table." Back in the studio, Ibrahim finally broke the silence. "I am not your enemy," he said, "but I will not let you pretend we are equal while you still write the rules." A few days before the forum, Ibrahim Traoré had walked into a school in Burkina Faso. No press, no cameras, just him, his driver, and 2 guards. He asked to speak to a small group of children, 3rd graders. One boy caught his eye immediately. He sat quietly in the back, feet swinging, his shoes torn wide open. Ibrahim knelt beside him and asked, "What's your name?" The boy replied, "Salif." "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" The boy didn't answer right away. He looked down. Then he whispered, "President. But I don't think it's allowed for someone like me." Ibrahim looked him in the eyes. "Then I will go and speak for you, until you believe it is." Now, sitting on the international stage, watched by millions, Ibrahim thought of Salif, of all the children with broken shoes, broken homes, broken dreams, and in a soft voice he said, "I don't stand here as a perfect man. I stand here for the ones who never got the chance to stand." The camera zoomed in, and somewhere in Burkina Faso, Salif saw himself on the screen. Ketanji Brown Jackson had spent a lifetime hiding her tears, in courtrooms, in hearings, in silence. But when Ibrahim spoke those words, "I stand here for the ones who never got the chance," something inside her broke. She turned her face slightly to the side, but the cameras caught it. A single tear. It rolled slowly, quietly, and it spoke louder than any speech. She remembered her great-grandmother's stories, how black people had to step off the sidewalk when white folks passed, how her uncle was fired for looking too proud. She remembered a moment, age 9, watching her father lose a job he loved just for speaking up in a staff meeting. And now here she sat, not in a courtroom but beside a man who refused to bow. It was more than politics now. This was generational pain, met by generational courage. The world saw her tear. They saw his stillness. And somehow, in that soft, shared silence, the old world began to crack. The headlines that night didn't ask who won the forum. They asked, "Is this the beginning of something we've never seen before?" And it was. It truly was. A young journalist stood up at the back of the studio. His hands shook as he raised the mic. He was only 24. Half the room didn't even notice him. But his voice was steady. "President Traoré," he said, "how do you stay calm when people treat you like you're less than them?" The whole room went quiet. Ibrahim looked at him, then slowly answered. "Because I know where I come from," he said. "I've walked in mud to reach school. I've watched mothers feed 5 children with one bowl. I've seen death come from silence, not from war, but from neglect." He paused. "But I've also seen joy. In the eyes of a child who gets a book. In the hands of a farmer who finally owns his land. That's what keeps me calm." He pointed toward the back. "The boy who asked that question? He matters. You all matter." The camera caught the journalist quietly breaking down in tears. Ibrahim didn't flinch. He looked into the camera. "To every child watching in every forgotten place, you are not invisible." And across continents, people wept. The forum ended, but nobody moved. Producers gave the signal to cut the cameras. The lights dimmed, but no one left their seats. For several seconds, the room just breathed. Traoré stood. He didn't take a bow. He didn't raise a fist. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a rubber bracelet. Faded, worn out, the kind a child would make with string. He held it up. "This was made by a boy in a refugee camp," he said. "He gave it to me last year. He said, 'Wear this when the world tries to forget us.'" Ibrahim looked around the room. "And today, I did." He placed it on the table in front of Trump's empty chair and walked off the stage. Ketanji followed, and slowly, so did everyone else. It wasn't just a forum anymore. It had become a funeral for arrogance and a birth for dignity. And somewhere, back in Burkina Faso, that same boy who made the bracelet saw it on TV. He smiled and whispered to himself. He remembered me. In the days that followed, the video went viral across the globe. But it wasn't just the views, it was the feeling. Something had shifted. In classrooms from Ghana to Compton, teachers played the footage. In cafes in London, strangers discussed it. "I've never seen something so quiet, say so much," one news anchor said. Traoré never gave a victory speech. He didn't need to, because people felt like they were there, in that studio, watching justice rise beside truth, watching history happen, not from power, but from pain. One tweet said it best. "He didn't speak like a president. He spoke like a father, like a son, like all of us." Ketanji later wrote, "That day wasn't about politics. It was about remembering who we are. And as this story ends, you, yes, you watching right now, need to remember something too. If this story moved you, if it made you feel proud, or cry, or finally seen, please don't scroll away. Hit the like button, subscribe if you believe dignity should never be silenced, and comment below, 'I see you, Ibrahim,' so the world knows. We were all in that room. Let this video be the spark, because Africa is rising, and so are we all."